Hello, everyone, and welcome to AWEA Virtual Bootcamp, Part 2, the Asset Registry webinar. I'm Sean Taylor. Before I introduce our speakers, I would like to welcome and encourage you to engage with our experts today by using the Q&A box located in the right corner of your GoToWebinar interface. We will try and answer as many questions as possible during the last 15 to 20 minutes. Please note that all phone lines will be muted during this webinar. After the webinar has concluded, we will provide a brief survey about the webinar, and later we will send an email with a link to watch the webinar on demand. Now, I'd like to introduce our speakers for today. David Totman, Vice President of Asset Management at Innovyze, and Jason Shannon, Water Utility Practice Solution Engineer at Esri. David Totman is the Vice President of Asset Management for Innovyze, providing strategic direction for infrastructure systems management across the entire Innovyze product line. He has been in the water industry for over 38 years and has applied geospatial technology to business process optimization, project analytics, and full lifecycle infrastructure management for the last 32 years. Prior to Innovyze, he was the Global Water Industry Manager for Esri and served as the Asset Manager for Colorado Springs Utilities, one of the largest municipally owned forest-service utilities in the USA. His state government service included water quality and water rights adjudications. He is a member of the American Water Works Association and the American Society of Civil Engineers. As an officer in the American Society of Engineers, he holds the title of Past President of the Utility Engineering and Surveying Institute. Our second speaker, Jason Shannon, is the Water Utility Practice Solution Engineer at Esri. Jason has been with Esri for over 16 years supporting water solutions. His recent focus is on helping Esri business partners maximize their solution potential on the ArcGIS platform, including the latest utility network foundations. David Totman, I will hand it off to you now.
All right, thanks, Sean, for those introductions there. Many of our listeners, I'm sure you're familiar with Jason and I doing webinars together. We've enjoyed lots of presentations. So just a quick reminder of the AWIA, the AWEA Virtual Bootcamp schedule. We had our kickoff webinar back in October before the holidays. And we are, this is a 5-part series that kind of show, all the upcoming webinars. And today we're focused on building a GIS-centric water asset registry. So Jason and I will be talking about that. And I hope you stay tuned for next month's webinar, where we'll be bringing in CityWorks, and they'll be talking about enterprise asset management systems. So with no further delays, let's jump right into this. So today I kind of want to, since it's been since October, wanted to give a quick review of webinar number 1. Couple words about setting the stage for the asset registry, and then we're really going to kind of turn it over to Jason to talk about the tools and how to build one. I will actually make some comments about hydraulics, and then Jason will kind of wrap it up with the utility network and all things ArcGIS Pro. And then of course we're leaving time for Q&A. What I would like to do to understand the audience, though, and this was kind of in our first webinar, but Sean, I'd like to start off with the first polling question is, have you already filed your AWEA certification?
Thank you, David. Have you already filed your AWIA certification? Our responses are yes. I or we have already submitted our AWIA certification. No, I or we wish to learn more. I don't know. And not applicable. I am a consultant or vendor and wish to learn more. We will leave the polling responses open for about 30 seconds and then come back with the results. Thank you.
Yeah, this basically just helps Jason and I understand who all's attending out there. I can pretty much guarantee you'll probably learn something, regardless of whether you filed or not, but that's our intent.
Okay, and we'll go ahead and share the results here. So it looks like a good percentage of you, 36%, said not applicable. I am a consultant or vendor and wish to learn more. Another 35% said no, I or we wish to learn more. 26% said I don't know. And then finally 3% said yes, I or we have already submitted our AWIA certification.
Okay, great. Well, that's good to know. So a lot of you haven't done that already, or you're part of the organization, you're not sure about the certification, but all of us are hoping to learn something out of this webinar. So that's good to know. Thanks, Sean. All right, so let's do a quick review of the first webinar. While back in October, there were still some training activities going on. Those have all since been completed by the EPA, but their materials that came out of training are all available. And we kind of mentioned that the EPA themselves has a very robust website with lots of different tools out there and resources for OWIA. We talked about the deadlines that many of the big utilities, which probably already have a lot of these plans in place, especially emergency response plans and such. The deadline's coming up here very soon, at the end of March, and those smaller utilities have pretty much throughout the year and into next to start applying. But again, to kind of get a feel for those that may not have submitted their OWIA certificates. Sean, I know we're going to jump right into one more polling question is that, what size population does your community water system serve?
Thank you, David. And again, what size population does your community water system, CWS, serve? Responses are 100,000 or more, between 50,000 and 99,999, between 3,301 and 49,999, I don't know, and not applicable. I am a consultant or vendor. We'll leave the responses open for 30 seconds and then come back and share the results. Thank you.
So just like the OWIA certification polling question, this just helps us understand who all is in attendance from size of utilities and what some of the expectations might be.
Okay, looks like we got a fair amount of answers here. So a majority of you, 34%, said not applicable. I'm a consultant or vendor. Another 26% said over 100,000. 24% said 3,301 to 49,999. 14% said 50,000 to 99,999. And then finally 2% said I don't know.
Okay. And that's what Jason and I, as kind of engage in a lot of these conversations, the large utilities, we know you already have active programs, and it's really the small to medium utilities that are really starting to ask the questions about, what's out there. There's just a whole lot of noise in the market. Can I get some good solid answers? So, all right, good to know, Sean. Thanks. So one of the things, we talked about also from that first webinar was really, you do your risk and resilience assessment first, then you follow up with your ERP 6 months later, and you're doing this for each of your PWS IDs, your public water system identifications. And the fact is you don't send in the plans themselves, you just file the certificates. And, we kind of talked about there's no one standards, there's no one boilerplate solution. It's whatever is going to fit your organization. There's lots of resources. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. And there really are no, quote, compliant software systems. Many of the systems help you comply, but, don't be really looking for an OWIA compliant certified software system. And so that's one of the things that say we talk about how, some of these integration efforts come together to help you comply with OWIA. We mentioned that this was a group effort, so to speak, kind of the Innovyze, CityWorks, Esri platform, all talking to the system of record, if you will, which is kind of important. That's what today's webinar is all about, is the asset registry. And so back in October, from the Esri perspective, we talked about the system of systems. From the CityWorks perspective, one of the key things is a GIS-centric solution where it's the same asset inventory that feeds that comes from Esri also feeds all the CityWorks work activities, and from Innovyze we have this robust stack of hydraulic models and asset performance and risk models built all on top of ArcGIS. That's kind of the nature of this webinar series on how all these come together. One of the interesting things that I've learned since the first webinar is there's now hundreds of resources out there. I mean, literally from A to Z in consulting, they all now have dedicated programs that help you comply with OWIA. This is one of my favorites, a newsletter that's being published out there on all the updates to OWIA. You also find that academia now is involved. So various universities are having OWIA compliant programs that help you from an educational perspective. But we also find that financial institutions and publications are writing about OWIA. Cybersecurity institutions, organizations are writing about OWIA. Legal entities are writing about OWIA. Even the policy government kind of groups that help you comply with some of these policies are definitely involved with OWIA. And of course, the Association of State Drinking Water Administrators are responding, and they're kind of partnering with AWWA. And that really brings me to, if there's one thing you learn about this entire webinar, if you haven't been to the Water ISAC, please put that in your internet Google vocabulary. Just Google them. It's a very robust site of lots of information, and it should be, because it's fed by all these different entities that are kind of our go-to partners in education. So the American Water Works Association and National Rural Water and WEF and all the ones that you see here. All those folks are contributing to this Water ISAC website. So again, if you were to take one thing away from this webinar, please, there's lots of information available there. We're also starting, we see RFPs hitting the streets, for utilities wanting assistance with, responding to OWIA, and some of these, are being awarded already, right? 6-figure awards for OWIA assistance. So it's the internet is booming with lots of different information on OWIA out there. Again, one of the things we kind of learned, I had some questions about the first webinar, and was very much, we are offering a kind of a solution-based approach, right? The COTS configuration of Esri, CityWorks, and Innovyze, and how you would respond to OWIA, because we're as partners, we're all designed to kind of work together. One of the questions that we may not have made too clear was, that we assume, there is a cyber protection program in place. And I had some follow-up conversations with the American Water Works Association and talking specifically about security. Now, when I was at Colorado Springs Utilities, we called it facility hardening and other things with cybersecurity. We used our GIS to kind of identify structures and ways of doing protection measures. But when it comes to specific cyber protection programs, we kind of had this assumption that since we're all built on top of ArcGIS, which is FedRAMP and FSMA compliant, that some of these protection measures were in place. But again, I highly encourage you to go to awwa.org/cybersecurity. It's a great website where they talk about cybersecurity and guidance and how to get there, and it's all built off the NIST cybersecurity framework. So if you're to remember Water ISAC, also then remember awwa.org/cybersecurity. That will help you with some of those current concerns. So, all right, so let's kind of jump into today's content for sure. In talking about the asset registry, just to kind of tee this up a little bit for Jason. If you were to, kind of Google asset registry, you usually get hundreds of thousands, if not millions of hits. And I have to go back to, the definitive standard, in asset management. While this isn't an asset management webinar, it really, when we talk about asset registries, we go to the ISO 55000 standard on asset management. And it takes me back a little bit because I was very privileged while at Esri to host the technical committee 251 meeting back in 2016, the fall of 2016, where actually delegates from all over the world came to the Esri campus, and we hosted them for a week, and we banged on the standard. So again, the concept of GIS and asset registry and asset management, and thus OWIA compliance, it's at the heart. I was fortunate enough to present on GIS and asset management, where we talked about the value of location, the value of understanding your assets in the context of geography and location, because that's what soils do they sit in, what dynamic loading is coming from the roads, what's the vegetation cover, all these different things all depend on location. And of course, we were kind of looking at the swell of utilities that were struggling with some of these new regulations that were coming on board, especially the small systems and the quantity of small systems out there in the U.S. faced with some of these challenges. And they're all looking at, back then it was the aging infrastructure and the report card, and kind of my ASCE hat was talking about all things infrastructure, and really then how these systems kind of play into the infrastructure life cycle as it goes from planning, design, operate, maintain, and also then in just the kind of the whole renewal purpose as well. And so even back then, we've been talking about the asset registry of understanding the coordinates, the X, Y, and Z, and Z1 and 2, especially for vertical assets coordinates, but really understanding the physical attributes, diameter, material. And as you get into asset management, specific elements like make, model, serial number help you with kind of your supply chain and even manufacturer recalls and understanding things about those assets. And really installation date is one of those key pieces, because it gets you an indicator of age, right, which we use then as surrogate parameters for understanding condition at times. But you also really want to know some of the operational aspects, what's maybe the average pressures, but from operating, the turns to close, the number of turns to close, and the thread left or right, lefty loosey, righty tighty was one of the operational mantras back then. And so and even asset class is one of those things you could irrespective of the parameters of the attributes, like diameter, you could subtype these into asset classes. And so again, back to Colorado Springs, where we actually had slope, we had terrain, that's Colorado, right? So we have mountains, but we had some gravity mains that actually had pretty significant slopes. So even though they're small diameter, like 8-inch, they still acted as collectors because of the slope that they had. So you can do lots of things with your asset registry and the attribution that help you manage these assets as you move forward. So, as I kind of mentioned, really understanding the physical asset. What are those engineering physical properties that help me describe the asset? One of the important things, and I think Jason will address this, you need to really write work to your assets. And I know CityWorks will emphasize that in the next webinar, that because there are multiple assets, especially with water, there's multiple assets in the road, multiple pipes. So you can't really write a work order to an address. You need to write it to the specific asset. And this asset registry then, of course, it feeds your map, feeds from the GIS, and it feeds the organization. And we also kind of know, can be intuitive, and we'll talk about this in later webinars, that risk is really a spatial function. The likelihood of failure and the consequence of failure are very spatial in nature, right? Corrosive soils, dynamic loading, assets next to City Hall or hospitals, all of those things come together in understanding total risk. I used to, talk about kind of balancing the physical ledger and general ledger. The general ledger that the accountants have, they have a certain, concept of what's in the ground. and they have their accounting buckets. One of the things I would do at Colorado Springs Utilities too was trying to balance the checkbooks, if you will. All of the debits and credits, with the physical ledger as you operate and maintain these assets and retired them and put in new assets, they had to kind of balance with the general ledger, right? So it's very important to kind of have these systems tied to one another and understanding exactly what you have and what you're doing. And as you'll kind of see later on too, this concept of a single source of truth, right? That's the power of Innovyze and CityWorks talking to Esri as we all work off of the same set of feature classes, if you will. So, I'm going to turn it over here to Jason pretty soon on how to build one. But in setting that up, Sean, we have one more polling question. Do you have a GIS?
Thank you, David. And again, do you have a GIS? The responses are yes, I or we use Esri ArcGIS. Yes, I or we use a different GIS. No, I or we do not have a GIS. And finally, I don't know. We'll leave the responses open for 30 seconds and then come back and show the results. Thank you. Okay, looks like we have some good responses here. So again, do you have a GIS? 95% of you said yes, I or we use Esri ArcGIS. 3% responded with yes, I or we use a different GIS. 2% did not know. And then finally, no one responded with I or we do not have a GIS. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Sean. So for the next couple of minutes, I want to take some time and talk about some of the tools and some of the resources that are available for building an asset registry with ArcGIS. I wanted to touch on, David showed this slide earlier and covered some of this in the first webinar, but I wanted to just touch on this a little bit more and really expand on the three fundamental systems that ArcGIS supports. The first one, being the system of record, and that's really what this is about today, is the system of record as the asset registry. And Esri provides tools that enable utilities and organizations to be able to store their asset information in GIS. By doing that and utilizing the ArcGIS platform, you can then expose that information out to the rest of an organization. By using the system of engagement and maps and applications, organizations can take that system of record data, that asset registry, along with other information from other business systems combined, and bring that into the hands of those who need it within the organization through maps and applications. And then taking that one step further, bring that information into the system of insight. And this is really where the power comes in of being able to do analytics and predictive analysis of when might my assets fail, or looking at historical information about the assets and the water distribution system. And so all of these systems work together as a full platform that we call ArcGIS. So I thought it was also helpful to just kind of talk a little bit about, what that platform really looks like in terms of some of our products. And so it requires, if you're going to build any of these asset registries or look at getting into the system of engagement or the system of insights, it really requires starting with an ArcGIS desktop. And right now that's either ArcMap or ArcCatalog. I know many of you are probably very familiar with those tools, and many of you have been using them for a long time. We also have now what we call ArcGIS Professional. ArcGIS Professional is a connected desktop. So this is the next generation of desktop tools for authoring the asset registry, for building out the information that participates in that registry. And I mentioned that it's connected. It's really connected to the mapping portal technology that's part of our platform. And that's available in really two different ways. That's available through what we call ArcGIS Online. I know many of you are probably familiar with that as well. That is a cloud-based SaaS application for managing maps and information in the cloud. And that's a subscription-based program that Esri offers. The other option is ArcGIS Enterprise. And so that is really an on-premise enterprise approach to serving out those maps and that information throughout your entire organization. And so we refer to both of those as our mapping portal technology. And then with both of those, you have ArcGIS apps. And it's really the maps and the apps that bring the power to the ArcGIS platform and be able to get that information curated in ArcGIS Desktop out into the hands of users in the field or engineers who might be making decisions, or even the public who you want to inform about different programs and things that your utility or your organization does. And then at the bottom, you see ArcGIS for developers. So across our entire ArcGIS platform, these tools are available for developers to extend. Now, some of our customers and organizations may have developers on site, but really a lot of our partners like Innovyze and CityWorks are able to take the ArcGIS platform, extend it, and build their solutions on top of it. I wanted to also mention ArcGIS solutions for water. So Esri's been in business for a very long time, 50 years in fact. We've worked with lots of different customers in different industries over that time. And we've specifically worked a lot with water organizations. And what we found is that, in order to respond to the various challenges of water organizations, our customers would build applications. They would hire consultants to help them do needs assessments and strategic plans and build technology to respond to all of that. And all of that is really cumbersome. It's expensive. And it puts the burden on the utility to ultimately come up with a solution. So about a decade or so, Esri embarked on this ArcGIS solutions endeavor. And so we offer solutions for various industries. And it was really born out of a lot of the work that we did for water. So if you haven't taken a look at the solutions, I would encourage you to take a look at what's out there. There's lots of solutions for things like water outage or analyzing water loss and water conservation, just to name a few. But one of the important solutions for what we're talking about, building an asset registry, is what we call our foundations. So we have a series of water distribution foundations that are available for organizations to get started. So if you're just an organization that's just getting started with GIS or maybe going through some digital transformation and you want to increase your GIS or increase your asset registry, these foundations were really designed for that. And there's two different flavors. The first foundation is the Water Distribution Utility Network Foundation. Now this, at this point, requires an enterprise geodatabase. It requires ArcGIS Enterprise and what we call the utility network management. And we'll get into more of that a little bit later on. But this is really a bit more of a sophisticated approach to building an asset registry that has intelligence built in. And again, this is deployed in ArcGIS Enterprise, which means your organization needs to provide and manage the computing infrastructure, that mapping portal technology that I talked about earlier, to be able to support this. It leverages the utility network. It can take longer to deploy because it's a bit more sophisticated approach, but it's also highly customizable, meaning that your organization can extend and change the schema and the structure of this foundation to meet the needs of the organization, as well as meeting the needs of additional solutions and business applications like Innovyze and CityWorks. The Utility Network Foundation also features support for something we call versioning. Versioning lets organizations look at their asset registry at a certain point in time. So you can roll back to a month ago, 6 months ago, years ago, and see what our asset registry looked like at that point. As well as if you're building in future plans, you can start to look at what will our asset registry look like based on these future developments. It also features an easier to localize schema, so international organizations can take that, localize it into their local language. Esri is also working on providing some of those localizations as well. And this is generally more appropriate for a mid to large size utility. Now, I noticed in the poll we had kind of a range of utilities, some very small and some large. So on the small scale, the right-hand side here is our Water Distribution System Foundation. This is a hosted foundation. So this utilizes ArcGIS Online. And this is designed for smaller organizations to get a fast start and to be able to get started with an asset registry very quickly. And they don't need to actually provide that computing infrastructure to do that. It's all hosted in ArcGIS Online. The downside is that it's simple features only. You don't get the network capability to do tracing and manage your connectivity, and there's lots of other benefits we'll talk about with the utility network. So it's simple features only and no version. But you can use ArcGIS Pro for precision edits and manage some level of topology to maintain some of that connectivity. Now we've built both of these, really to be able to be in line with each other. So an organization can start with the hosted foundation, and then when they're ready, they can move into the more advanced utility network foundation. And these foundations include an information model. So the information model provides the foundation for workflows and comprehensive solutions that Esri provides. And it's really a starting place for the implementation. In neither case, the utility network or the hosted foundation, is it going to be an end-all be-all for an organization? They're going to have information that they might maintain. David talked about some of that information that you can add to these foundations, to these information models. And each of these includes a schema that represents a utility system, a series of pre-configured maps, some sample data, deployment instructions, as well as the data dictionaries that define the information model, so you can understand before you get started what all is included and identify any gaps that you might need and add those along the way. And these also provide guides for representing your assets on a map. Now, both of these foundations can be deployed through an automated deployment, and we do this through what we call the Solution Deployment Tool. This is an add-in to ArcGIS Pro, and so it's a free add-in. You download the add-in, you install it, and then you can connect to the solutions and actually deploy them right through ArcGIS Pro, and it makes it much easier and more seamless to be able to deploy either of these foundations. So I'm going to hop into a quick demonstration, and I just want to highlight a couple of these things here. So we'll first start in ArcGIS Pro. So this is ArcGIS Pro. I have some asset information here. I've actually deployed the utility network foundation, and I'm looking at the sample information, the sample data that comes with that. So I can see here I've got all of my different assets here on the map. I've got some water lines, I've got fittings, I've got valves. With the utility network, I can actually dig down and go into things like a pump station. I can enter into what we call containment mode, and I can actually start to look at more sophisticated assets within that pump station. I can see that I have some valves here, I have some pumps, I have some flow meters, along with my flow valves. And I don't have to necessarily maintain everything in a connected environment on the map. With the utility network, I can actually maintain connectivity through associations. So you can see here that I have my flow meters that are actually attached to my flow valves. They don't appear that way on the map, but if I were to perform tracing, they would actually trace through and be connected in that environment. I want to just quickly highlight the Solution Deployment Tool. So I've added that as an add-in here, and if I go to my Share tab and I go to ArcGIS Solutions, I get a series of tasks here, and one of those tasks is to deploy an ArcGIS solution. So one of the things I need to do is be signed in to either my portal in ArcGIS Enterprise or ArcGIS Online, and then I get access to the catalog of solutions here. And we can see here for water, there is a whole series of solutions, and one of those is this Water Distribution Systems Foundation. So I would simply hit deploy, and it would walk me through a series of steps, and it would create for me all of the services and all of the maps for that Water Distribution Foundation. So a really easy way to get started. I want to also highlight a couple of other things here. We have one of the applications that's part of the foundation, and this is a network viewer. So this is a viewing application that I can actually view my asset registry via a web browser. I can do this from my desktop, I can do this from a device like an iPad, and I have a very elegant experience and access to all of the asset registry information. For example, if I wanted to look up a specific asset like a control valve, I could type in the control valve number here or a part of the number and simply search for, and the map will bring me to that particular asset and present me the information that's in the asset registry pertaining to that particular valve. So we see that this is a 6-inch gate valve. We can see the information about turns to close, maybe the last time it was updated, when it was installed, and maybe information about previous maintenance activities as well. And the last thing I want to highlight is ArcGIS Insights. So this is an application that's part of ArcGIS platform, either in online or enterprise. And this is a tool that's really a kind of a business intelligence and exploratory analysis tool. And what I've done here is just brought in some of the asset registry information so that I could visualize it in perhaps another way. I can see here my map, and I can see a breakdown of water distribution mains by their material and diameter. So I can see my cast iron pipe, my 6-inch cast iron pipe. And if I click on my chart, I can see where that pipe is in my system. I can also look at, when some of this pipe was installed. Here we can see that, back in the 30s, there was a high amount of cast iron pipe installed throughout the system. And I could do the same thing with valves, or really any asset, such as hydrants. Here I can see the distribution of my hydrants by their manufacturer type. And I can simply click on the various different parts of the chart here and see those particular assets on the chart. So this is a helpful way of just visualizing your asset registry and understanding, what type of assets you have, how old are they, and really a good start for some asset management. I'm going to jump real quick back into the PowerPoint here. And I've just got a couple more slides. So one of the questions that comes up a lot is, how do we get information into this asset registry? And one of the ways is through high accuracy GPS, actually going out into the field and doing some data collection, bringing those maps out in the field and either collecting new assets or updating existing assets. Another way is to leverage what you have. Some organizations may have some existing GIS layers, and those could be in the form of shapefiles or geodatabases. And so starting with what you have is really important, and then adding to that registry over time as new assets get built and installed. A really common thing is for organizations to have CAD data. They may have worked with an engineering company in the past and have some CAD information. ArcGIS can natively read CAD information, and you can also use that CAD information to populate your asset registry in a GIS. Another way is to look at reference drawings. You can sometimes just have, maybe it's paper maps that the organization's had for a long time. Sometimes it's even sketches on something like a napkin, right? Those can still be useful in helping to identify what a particular asset might be and where it's roughly located. Those drawings can also be attached to assets and maps for reference out in the field. And ArcGIS has some data loading tools right inside of ArcGIS Pro to be able to load all of this type of information into your asset registry. And the last thing I want to cover here is Collector for ArcGIS. So this is a really important application that's part of the platform. We're actually bringing that information out into the field and collecting and updating new asset information for your asset registry. And this application is available on Microsoft, Apple, and also Google. So if you're just getting started, or if you're wanting to, really expand your digital transformation and expand your asset registry, there's lots of resources. There's ArcGIS documentation. Esri has some white papers specifically about small systems and getting started with the foundation. Lots of Esri training, and of course, Esri partners have a wealth of information and are also provide lots of services for helping you to get started as well. So with that, I'm going to transition back to David, and he's going to talk about hydraulics.
Yeah, so we have the polling question here, Sean. Does your GIS support a hydraulic model?
Thank you, David. And again, does your GIS support a hydraulic model? Our responses are yes. We have an ArcGIS-based hydraulic model. Yes, but we convert to a CAD or other based hydraulic model. No. And finally, I don't know. We'll keep the responses open for 30 seconds and then share the results. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm just going to touch a little bit about kind of like hydraulic properties for the asset registry. The actual when we talk about modeling and some of the Innovyze products, that will be actually in webinar number 4, I believe. But just trying to get a feel for those of you that have a GIS supporting your hydraulic model.
Okay, it looks like we got a lot of good responses here. So again, does your GIS support a hydraulic model? 50% of you said yes, we have an ArcGIS based hydraulic model. 23% said I don't know. 16% said no, and then finally 12% said yes, but we convert to a CAD or other based hydraulic model. Thank you.
Okay, great. Yeah, great. So I want to talk a little bit about hydraulics, and you know, we talk about kind of have these hydraulically competent asset registries. I mean, it's one thing to kind of connect the sticks, if you will, within your GIS, but to actually have them be hydraulically competent is another thing. That's one of the things that Innovyze specializes in. We have tools that kind of obviously prepare for all that. But when we're talking about really the asset registry in context of hydraulics, we're of course talking about the pipe, you know, both you know, pressurized potable drinking water pipe, but also, you know, the gravity mains and sewer. But again, this is really a focus on water. So, you know, the valves and, well, manholes on sewer, but pumps and reservoirs and tanks, you know, all those things that obviously are helping you manage. But there are many things where people have not really put in those water assets into their GIS because it really supports the model, or they have it in their plant asset management system. Where in today's you know, need for understanding both natural and built systems and how they all come together, both horizontal and vertical, and the effects of climate and such, we're finding that we need to bring all of this data into these systems of records so we can kind of manage the entire, you know, asset registry, if you will. And one of the biggest things we see, you know, all the time is really something as simple as that diameter check, right? Even Jason showed in his demo, you know, he clicked on a 6-inch valve, and I was going to interrupt him and see, was that indeed a 6-inch pipe that valve was sitting on? Because, you know, many times we see mismatches, right? Where it would have been, say, he clicked on a 6-inch valve, but it could have been a 4-inch main or an 8-inch main. Well, we know we can't really do that unless we have a fitting, you know, a reducing structure. So, you know, having that high fidelity asset registry really helps you in understanding the hydraulics, because again, the whole goal for the asset registry is not just, you know, to feed a map, and it's not just to feed your work order system. It's actually to do the more advanced analytics, understanding the hydraulics of the system, because that's, you know, that's what's really going on out in the field. And so again, just making sure you have that diameter alignment. There's also, you know, various properties, attributes you can collect that, you know, affect both water quantity and water quality, right? So from the quantity, we're talking about flow and pressure, and quality, though, you know, when we can also model actually water quality, you get into these reaction coefficients that you get from you know, pipe material of all things, right? So that simple, you know, we talked about diameter, but also just pipe material is a very critical attribute to have, and have it accurately, because that drives all sorts of different hydraulic parameters. And when we start talking about these hydrostatic and hydrodynamic systems, those are just, you know, $100 words that really talk about, you know, fluids at rest and fluids in motion, and the different attributes and pieces of equipment, assets that, you know, control those different types of systems. And kind of what Jason alluded to when he went into the containment, right, to drill into that pump station and look at the details, right? When you start adding all these different components to manage a hydraulically competent asset registry, if you will, you know, you get the benefits of doing pressure zone management, right? You can start to understand which pressure zones you have, why are they behaving the way they are from high to low pressures, and you know, that really, that other bullet on sectionalizing really helps. All that helps you with water loss mitigation, right? So trying to understand my ability to isolate different parts of the system. It depends upon whether my valves are actually operable or not, and so on and so forth. And just from the demand allocation, that second bullet was, you know, what is my consumptive use, right? And that gets into my meter system. You know, what water are people using, and how I allocate that to the various pipes in the system. all these different parameters also will help you with something very operational like unidirectional flushing, right? Having the ability to analyze, that my water does flow a particular direction, and if I have stagnant dead ends, if you will, in my water system where the water's not turned over, right? And so I can start to have basically disinfection byproducts come out from the chlorine, and so understanding how I can kind of eradicate taste and odor complaints by unidirectional flushing are things I can do with a hydraulically competent asset registry. And we can then obviously get into the more sophisticated elements like transient analysis, for surge mitigation and contaminant spread. That seems to be the thing now. More and more people are wanting to do water quality modeling as well, just because of the different contaminants that are being introduced, and are trying to understand, especially since our regulations are getting tighter with smaller trace amounts being regulated, trying to understand the water quality aspect. So again, just a couple things, very brief discussion of hydraulics. We'll get much more into that in the webinar number 4, when we focus on some of the Innovyze products and modeling aspects for OWIA compliance. So Jason, back to you. I think we have another polling question, if you might introduce that.
Yep, thanks, David. So we're going to talk about utility network, but before we do that, we have another polling question. When are you planning to migrate to ArcGIS Pro and the utility network?
Thank you, Jason. And again, when are you migrating to ArcGIS Pro and the utility network? Our responses are already there, within 6 months, 12 to 18 months, and no plans at this time. We'll leave the responses open for 30 seconds and then share the results. Thank you.
While we're waiting for that, just wanted to let everybody know that there are resources available if you're an organization that has some existing GIS data, whether that's a geometric network or just regular GIS data, and you are looking to migrate to the utility network. There are some resources and solutions out there that we can talk about.
Great, thank you, Jason. So again, when are you migrating to ArcGIS Pro and the utility network? 34% of you said no plans at this time. 28% said 12 to 18 months. 24% said already there, and then finally 14% said within 6 months. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that information. That really helps us at Esri kind of gauge where you all are, as well as Innovyze too. Having a good understanding of where our customers are in that process is very helpful. Right. I do want to spend a couple of minutes talking about the utility network. Specifically network management with ArcGIS. As many of you know, this is a relatively new approach to managing network information in GIS. It's been out now for about 2 years. And Esri really built this technology to respond to a growing need for utility organizations to better model their asset information, and specifically the connectivity of that information, as well as David mentioned, a higher fidelity, being able to model all of the devices that now participate in IoT and sensors that communicate really important information, and having a model and tools to be able to have that in your asset registry and your GIS is really important. We also wanted to provide some better visualization and analytical capabilities. As David mentioned, looking at things like pressure zones and identifying, those pressure zones and where there may be problems in the system. We can do that through subnetwork analysis. And then also being able to provide more access to that network capability for everybody throughout an organization, not just GIS people, not just engineers, but field crews, and being able to have that. And so the utility network really provides a foundation for infrastructure modernization for utility organizations. When we talk about modeling the complete network, we're really talking about, for water, it's distribution, collection, and conveyance. And we're also talking about being able to model things like network controllers. These are devices that control the flow of a commodity through the particular pipe. We also can provide better connectivity models. David mentioned the situation where you have a 6-inch valve, but we want to make sure that that's actually on a 6-inch pipe. And there is a rule base that's part of the utility network that can help you ensure that data integrity. When you put data in to your asset registry, you can validate it against a rule set that makes sure everything fits together as it's supposed to. I showed a little bit about the containment and some of the devices that can participate as well. So the utility network is supported on electric networks, gas networks, and then within water, we have water, wastewater, and stormwater. The utility network enables existing business workflows. We've been able to map for quite some time, but now our maps get smarter with more capability. They can also be leveraged with schematics side by side. We can look at component views to increase our asset management capabilities and be able to visualize and store information in complex structures like pump stations, and be able to perform more advanced analytics, looking at pressure zones, looking at DMA areas, and being able to perform analysis at that level is really important, as well as the historical and planned views. And all of this is 3D capable and 3D aware. Another important piece is really that real-time sharing and collaboration across an organization. I talked about the concept of a connected desktop. So being able to perform analysis in desktop and have that immediately available via web applications to others in the organization, or to maps that are out on mobile devices out in the field. So when you close a valve in the field, that change persists across your entire network. So anybody working with the network knows that that valve is closed, and that there could be things that happen because of your closing of that valve. And so it provides this real-time awareness capability throughout the entire organization. So that concludes what I had to really talk about with the utility network. I'd certainly encourage anybody with questions to put those in the question dialogue. We'd be happy to address those.
Okay, yeah, great. Thanks, Jason. Just as a reminder, everyone, our next webinar, part 3, is on Wednesday, February 12th. Where we're going to be talking, we'll have CityWorks joining us, and they'll be talking about their GIS-centric enterprise asset management system, and again, kind of in the context of AWEA and the things that help you comply. So Jason, go ahead to the next slide. We'll kind of open this up for questions. I know we have it looks like about 6 minutes or so based on my timing, and we are having a bunch of questions roll in. Some really good ones here as well, and actually some very specific ones. But one of the questions I think kind of start off right off the bat was you kind of showed in the containment the associated assets, right, that they don't have to be physically connected, they can be associated. So one of the questions was how do assets which have connectivity through association show up in the hydraulic model, and you might have a take on that. Mine we'll be able to answer that question in more detail. But again, one of the things when we talked about the Innovyze product line, and Jason kind of mentioned, so Innovyze has InfoWater Pro, which is built on top of ArcGIS Pro and supports version 2.0 supports the utility network. So we read and write to that utility network and be able to follow the assets that are involved. So there's a little more, maybe the answer is, stay tuned. We'll get you this question answered in our follow-ups. But definitely, I expect all objects of the asset registry that are in the utility network are made available. Wouldn't that be correct, Jason?
Yeah, I would say so. Yep, exactly.
Yeah. So, okay. I guess potentially, you also mentioned the two different forms of the utility network, kind of in the more enterprise, more sophisticated, I believe was the word you used, and then there's the more simple. Does Esri have in the roadmap, being able to support the utility network within ArcGIS Online? Is that something that would be available?
It is on the roadmap. I don't know exactly where we are with that. It is something that we've talked about and that we've planned to have some network capabilities within ArcGIS Online. I don't think it'll be quite as robust as what you would be able to do with the enterprise version, but it's certainly something that we've talked about and are planning for. One thing I didn't mention is that coming soon, you will be able to do utility network and have utility network capabilities in a file geodatabase. So that's really helpful for prototyping and for smaller organizations without the overhead of ArcGIS Enterprise. The downside is that you lose that ability to have the network capabilities for everybody in your organization. It's kind of locked down to a single user at that point.
Okay. Well, yeah, but that's really good to know, because that will be a very quick jump start for some of the, I guess, the smaller IT shops, but many of those any of the features that we've been in that file geodatabase, you could publish to ArcGIS Online and make them available in Collector. You just wouldn't have that connectivity potentially.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess another question very specifically. Could you make a comment about ArcGIS? What versions of ArcGIS, the basic, advanced, would I need to manage the utility network? Can I do this with ArcGIS Basic, or do I need something more advanced?
Yep, very good question. So in order to edit and administer a utility network, it does require an ArcGIS Desktop Standard or Advanced. You cannot do that with a Basic, but with Basic you can connect to the utility network, you can view and query assets, you can work with the utility network in some capacity, but it does require a Standard or Advanced to administer and edit.
Okay. This is a very specific question. I probably should have interrupted you while you're in your demo mode. There was the question was that they don't see the deployment icon in the Share tab when you're talking about the deployment.
Yep.
Is that potentially maybe a little bit of troubleshooting? Is there a version issue? Is it a licensing issue?
It is a separate download, so I'm not sure if I was clear on that. So the solution deployment add-in is a separate download that you would get from our solutions site, that site that I showed. So you would download the add-in, install it to ArcGIS Pro. It may require a restart of Pro, but then it should show up in that share dialog. If it doesn't, certainly reach out to Esri. It is supported through tech support, so there could be a version issue or something like that, but it is a separate download. Okay,
good. Thanks for that. Also, I think, and I think definitely in webinar number 4, where we get to talk a bit more about some of the modeling. I'll touch base on the differences in solutions, if you will, right? There's, definitely, while I was at Esri, helped build a lot of those water solutions, and they really help you to leverage all of the ArcGIS platform, but they're definitely, those solutions need additional information from, say, other solutions, such as, CityWorks and Innovyze with advanced hydraulic modeling. That feed those. Definitely, Esri's done very well at creating visualization packages where the information comes from many of those connected systems that Jason was talking about. There's one more kind of a generic question in 3D. The 3D enablement. I mean, we obviously have it in ArcGIS Pro, but how does does 3D spill over into, say, like Collector and such, and some of the viewers? Can you comment a little bit about how pervasive is 3D right now?
Sure. Yeah, in terms of 3D visualization, ArcGIS Pro is one of the primary environments, but we also have scenes that you can view in a web environment. Collector doesn't have a 3D view at this point, but Collector does allow you to collect Z values, and so across the entire platform we support Z values, and so anytime you're interacting with the utility network, it is Z enabled. So it is in effect 3D. It's just that not all of the applications support visualizing that in 3D, but it is something that Esri's currently working on.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I see we're just about out of time for questions. All the questions that were submitted, we'll definitely get those answered to you in some follow-ups. You have both of our emails. I highly encourage you to contact either myself or Jason. We're more than happy to follow up with any of your questions there. And so, Sean, I believe we can turn it over to you for a final wrap up.
Yes, thank you, David. And again, thank you, David and Jason. We would like to thank everyone for attending today's session. If we did not get a chance to answer your question today, we will promise to get back to you with an answer. Before you go, we are going to provide you with a brief survey about today's webinar experience in your GoToWebinar interface. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.